So good morning, everybody. My name is Jesse, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. If you're joining us for the first time today, and I know we have a few new groups doing just that, then welcome to our program where we try and bring conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world through like a gazillion free live programs every single month. One other note before we dive in, May is our classic Backyard Bio Month. So if you haven't checked out backyardbio.net yet, all our efforts to get you out exploring the natural world, I really encourage you to do so. It's been a ton of fun. We're having so many teachers globally take part by getting their classes outdoors. Now, today isn't just a normal program. Today is a special program as we are continuing our amazing I Was a Kid series. If you haven't checked out iwasaKid.com, it is the brainchild of Karen Romano Young, who through amazing art and storytelling has helped feature some of the top cool scientists, explorers, amazing people around the globe, sharing their work and their career stories with kids like you. So I'll make sure you guys have that link at the end of the broadcast. For today, we are diving in literally and figuratively with Dr. Annelys Roque. She is going to tell us a little bit about her journey going into marine biology, getting to go on one of the most iconic research vessels of all time, and then completely switching careers to go into healthcare and helping save people's lives, which is such a unique story, something we've never featured on the broadcast before. So whether you're in Mr. Shattuck's class live with us, our water rockers in Guelph, or Miss Lewis's class right down the road from me here in St. Catharines, any other folks joining us, we'd love to hear where you're joining from on YouTube as well. And without further ado, Dr. Annelys, please, thank you so much for joining us and take us away. I'll bring up that presentation for you.
I'm very pleased to be here today to share my story with everyone listening. I've heard from Jesse that there's quite a number of groups from Canada that are listening, which is really exciting for me. I am currently, just so that you all know, in Atlanta, Georgia. So I'm gonna let Jesse pull this up and then we can start.
All right, I've got it. It wants to work for me nicely. It's misbehaving today entirely. And still misbehaving, so we're gonna see how this goes. Oh dear. All right. Oh no, that's not doing it. You know what? I'm gonna do it in a slightly different way, and we'll get it up that way. Here we go. I'm gonna do entire screen, and you just tell me when to switch. We'll go from there.
All right.
All right. Together we can make it work. Sorry for the weird meta view. All right, and we should be golden. Perfect.
All right, so I wanted to start here, particularly because we have some groups from outside of the United States, to give you an idea of my journey and geographically my journey. So I was born in a small island in the Caribbean, Cuba, and I was born in this province that you see right in the middle that says Santa Clara. So that's where I spent the first 6 years of my life. And in 1994, there was a lot of different things that were happening in Cuba at that time. It was affected quite dramatically by the fall of the Soviet Union. The economic situation had gotten pretty bad. My parents, in particular, were struggling with decisions as to how to take care of my sister and me. And based on that, and with the encouragement of my grandparents, they actually decided to immigrate to the United States. And during that time, some of the teachers listening may remember this. In the mid 90s, there was something called the rafter crisis coming out of Cuba, which means that thousands and thousands of people left Cuba on makeshift rafts to make it to the United States in hopes of freedom and in hopes of economic independence and opportunity. And my family was part of that exodus. And so we actually left Cuba in August of 1994 on a makeshift raft boat. Hard to know what to call it. I was 6 years old at the time. We left with about 30 other people. And we spent some time at sea in here, what are called the Florida Straits. There's about 90 miles from Cuba to Key West, a little bit more to Florida proper. Our journey was pretty perilous. I remember bits and pieces of it since I was pretty young. But what ended up happening is we were picked up at sea, really close to by the time that we made it to Florida, and taken to a part of Cuba called Guantanamo Bay, where there was a United States base at that time. And we actually were there with about 20,000 other refugees in a refugee camp for 6 months. And if you would go to the next slide, Jesse. So this is the only picture I have of my time in the refugee camp with my family. So I'll see if people can point out who I am. But if not, I am the kid that is being carried there. And at that point, I was 7 years old. I turned 7 years old in this refugee camp where we were there for 6 months from August of 1994 to February of 1995 when we finally made it to the United States. But my family treasures this photo because, and as you can see, I'm holding it because it's the only memory that we have, physical memory of the time that we spent in this camp, where literally nobody knew what had happened to us. This was before broad internet access, certainly no internet access in Cuba. And so my family in Cuba didn't know whether we were alive or dead, and our family in the United States only later learned how we were doing. But thankfully, we made it to the United States, and that is where this journey really began. Next slide, please, Jesse. Now, I'm going to cut ahead quite a bit because this journey into my role as Dr. Roque right now, I would say really took off at Harvard University, which is where I went to complete my undergraduate studies. I loved school, but it was a challenge. Coming to the United States meant that I had to learn a new language. My first language and my native language is Spanish. And so for the first 2 years that we were in the United States, I actually hated school. And I hated it because it was really hard. I didn't understand what was going on. I didn't understand what the teachers were saying. And it really took a while for me to feel comfortable and to learn the language. And so eventually I did. My sister, I have an older sister who's 3 years older than I am, who really paved the way for me and taught me the ropes in school when I didn't understand what was going on. And I was really good at school by the time I learned English, excelled through my elementary education, going on to middle and high school, and was really fortunate to have excellent teachers along the way that guided me and really started that love of science, that love of biology. I remember dissecting my first frog in ninth grade biology. And that is a memory I'll always remember because I was really fascinated by how the world around us worked. But it was this incredible opportunity that I received to get a full scholarship to Harvard University that completely changed my life because it exposed me to world-class scientists, to opportunities, and to eventually what would become my life's work, which is being a physician. So I love this picture because Veritas is the motto at Harvard, and it's something that I carry with me because it was the 4 years of my life that I would say completely changed the direction of what I thought I was going to do. Next slide, please, Jesse.
Hmm.
I like to include this because I am I am a Floridian at heart, but I'm also from the Caribbean, which means that I was 18 years old when I first saw snow. I know that for the Canadian classrooms here, that probably is unheard of, but I was a freshman in college the first time that I saw snow. This is my first snowman. I think it was pretty good. In Cambridge, we got quite a bit of snow, so that first year was a bit rough, going from living in 70 to 80 to 90-degree Fahrenheit temperatures to going to the negatives on a regular basis in the winter. But during this time, I made some incredible friends that are now family, almost several decades later. And I really treasure my time. Next slide, please. And it was during my time at Harvard that I met a fellow scientist that gave me some opportunities that I will treasure forever. So on this picture here on a boat deck, I'm sitting with another I Was a Kid feature, Dr. Peter Gerges. So as a freshman in college, I participated in this program that was geared towards connecting underrepresented minorities in science with Harvard scientists that ran labs, and it gave us an opportunity to work in these labs for a small stipend, as opposed to doing things like cleaning crew or some other jobs across campus. And so the goal of it was to expose us to the sciences and to hopefully encourage us to pursue careers in the sciences. And I was paired with Dr. Peter Gerges, who had just started at Harvard University that same year when I started college. And so his lab was brand new. I was brand new there. He was coming from California. I was coming from Florida. And we just clicked immediately. Peter did marine microbiology, and with a particular interest in what are called tube worms, or the endosymbiont, or the bacteria that lives inside the tube worms that helps them grow and transform sulfur to carbon. And that particular niche, after I learned a little bit more about it, I just fell in love with the work. And what you're looking at right now are pictures from, I believe this was the summer of my junior year in college, when I had the opportunity to spend the summer on a research vessel, the research vessel Atlantis, where we were out on the Oregon coast, so the west coast of the United States, for the summer, collecting specimens, doing experiments, and overall just had an incredible time during this adventure. And what you can see on the right here is me dissecting small tube worms that were recovered from the vents off the coast of the west coast of the United States. And so we were doing experiments through the night. I had the night shift, so I was up through the night, slept during the day, and then was doing science experiments. And I just have such fond memories from this summer. Next slide, please, Jesse. And it was during the summer where I got to go down on the submersible, the Alvin. And this was the last dive, I believe, of the summer. And it was actually Peter's dive. So he gave it to me as a gift, as an opportunity to go down on the Alvin, and something that I will cherish forever. So I was actually, if you believe it or not, I was the lead scientist on this dive, because this other person that was with me was not a scientist by training. She was a college student that was there for other reasons. And so I was considered the lead scientist. It was myself, this other person, and the pilot down there. And it's an all-day affair for the kids that are listening. You go down in the morning. It takes several hours to get to the bottom of the ocean. You're down there for several hours, and then it takes a while to come back. So this is an all-day affair. And I have to say, this is top 5 coolest things I've ever done in my life. And I've gone to do some really incredible things as a physician. Next slide. So this photo on the left I took while down there, and this is a hydrothermal vent. So this is essentially an opening in the bottom of the ocean where you have compressed steam that's coming out because it is so hot. So that's what we call a hydrothermal vent. And on the right here, what we have is the traditional bath that you get after your first dive on the Alvin. These are some of my lab mates here. On the left is Dr. I'm blanking on his full name here, but some of my lab mates, as soon as I came out, bathed me with very, very cold water. Next slide, please. So this is my Harvard graduation. These are my parents, whom I love dearly, and it is because of them that I'm here in this country and I was able to achieve so much. This is a really special day, and it really set off the next journey of my life and of my career path. So, next slide, please.
Hmm.
After I graduated from Harvard with the skills that I had learned in Peter's lab, I was really starting to question whether I wanted to go down the route of getting a PhD and pursuing similar work as was being done in Peter's lab, or whether I wanted to do something different. And that was a really, really hard year, and some really challenging questions that came up for me. I really loved the work that I was doing with Peter, and I loved the opportunities that I had and the experiences that I had on the research vessel and the work that we were doing in the lab. But I felt like I was missing something. I felt like there was some piece of it that didn't feel like it fulfilled me. And after doing some thinking, what I realized was that the piece I was missing for me was the human element, and that connection to science. And in the back of my mind, I had been thinking for a couple of years, well, maybe I should go to medical school. And I had talked to Peter about this, and he was very wise as always, and gave me some excellent counsel. And he said, you can change labs. This was before I graduated from college. You can change labs and go to a lab at the medical school, at Harvard Medical School, where you can do something that's more related to patient care. But ultimately, I really enjoyed the work that I was doing. I felt like it was a great opportunity to continue my work with Peter through the 4 years that I was an undergraduate at Harvard. And so I continued, and I was really fortunate that it was because actually of my experience and the fact that I have 4 years of experience in that lab that I was able to get a job at the National Institutes of Health, particularly what's called the Vaccine Research Center, which is this building that you see here, Building 40. And I got a job working in an HIV lab. So this was a HIV translational science lab where I was doing quite a number of experiments and working with who was at the time an infectious disease fellow. And so I thought that I would spend a year or two at the NIH and really think about whether I wanted to go back to do basic science work like Peter was doing in marine microbiology, or whether I wanted to go ahead and go to medical school. So during these 2 years at the NIH was the time when I realized that my passion really came from talking to people, from hearing their stories, and from subsequently trying to do my best to help remedy whatever ailed them. And that was through a lot of experiences I had there, shadowing in the clinical center, which is the hospital at the NIH, and also talking with my mentor at the time, who's an infectious disease fellow, and hearing her stories about caring for patients with HIV. Next slide, please. So this is a rendering of the virus that we know as human immunodeficiency virus. And I put this up here because my time at the NIH really dictated the rest of my career. HIV is a very stigmatizing condition. It is something that I think in the lay press we haven't heard as much about, because obviously because of SARS-CoV-2, but it is still something that is a global issue that primarily affects groups that are otherwise marginalized, people that identify as LGBTQI, and also affects parts of the world that a lot of times don't receive the same resources as developing nations. And it was my experience at the NIH and learning about these patients, and learning about the science of how to take care of these patients, that spurred in me a decision to go to medical school, and particularly go to medical school with the hopes of becoming an infectious disease doctor, so that I could help support these patients, care for them, and offer care that was non-judgmental, that took into account who they were as people, and that ultimately would help them during what a lot of times is the most challenging times of their life, which is when they first receive a diagnosis that they're HIV positive. Next slide, please. So this is some of my fun pictures from medical school. Medical school was a journey. It was a very challenging journey, educationally, emotionally, physically, as you learn the science of how to be a doctor, but also learn how to take care of people. And so the photo on the right is actually during one of the global health trips that I took. This is in the Amazon in Ecuador. And then on the left is how I memorized a lot of the bones of the face, which is basically the constant presence of my skull, and even on my kitchen table a lot of times. Next slide, please. So this is graduating from medical school. Again, you see my parents here. Everybody's a little bit older from the Harvard graduation, but I just have an immense joy from this day, as I really felt this was what I was meant to do. So next slide, please.
Hmm.
And then after you graduate from medical school in the United States, you have a period of what's called residency. And my residency was in internal medicine, which is what I chose to do. And I matched, or I went to San Francisco to complete my residency. And you can see the Golden Gate Bridge here in the background. This was at the time, I was fortunate to match one of the top programs in the country. And additionally, thinking ahead to what I wanted to do in infectious diseases, this gave me the opportunity to be at a place where there was a very strong infectious disease program, and I thought that I could learn from some of the world's expert really on not only HIV care but infectious disease care. Next slide, please. And I'm glad I went to San Francisco. It is a decision that changed my life in many ways because I met my husband there. And for those that have been have looked at the I Was a Kid website, you're familiar with Milo, my English bulldog, whom you can see here on the right. And this is my husband Daniel during our honeymoon in Thailand. So for many reasons, San Francisco changed my life. But the best reason is that I met my life partner, Daniel, and of course, Milo, who will forever be enshrined in the I Was a Kid series. Next slide, please. So I obviously nobody expected this, but after internal medicine residency, I stayed in San Francisco to pursue my infectious disease training. And during my first year of infectious disease training was when the pandemic started. So this is some of the gear that we as infectious disease physicians had to wear and continue to wear when we go into rooms of patients that are COVID positive. The picture on the right, we are wearing what are called PAPRs, which is instead of wearing an N95 mask, it's essentially an N95 mask for your entire face. And when we were having a lot of supply issues in the beginning of the pandemic, this is what we were wearing to go into the rooms of patients that were COVID positive. It was a really challenging and really scary time. And thankfully, through the advent of vaccines, we've been able to reduce the number of deaths and get to a place where hopefully this becomes an endemic disease. Next slide, please. And I like this picture. This was a picture that was featured in an article that I wrote about my experiences of being a Latina infectious disease doctor taking care of primarily Latino patients in the San Francisco area during the beginning of the pandemic and how challenging that was. But I think this just embodies who I am. Being a doctor is a pivotal part of who I am as a human being. I love my job. I love taking care of people, but it also is a journey that started in a very different way with my love of science and my love of the ocean, which I retain throughout this time. Next slide, please. And this is where I am now. So after I graduated from my infectious disease fellowship, I was really fortunate to take a job at Emory University, which is what brought my husband and I to Atlanta, Georgia from San Francisco. Next slide. But because I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, it also means that I am close to the aquarium here, which is one of the best aquariums in the world. It has 2 whale sharks. As you can see, one of them on the right here, and then it has this incredible exhibit about sharks, all different kinds of sharks. This was from a recent visit. I have become a member of the aquarium, of course, because even though I am a physician by training now, I think in my heart I will always be a marine biologist and retain that love of the ocean, which is what really started my love of science and of this career path. And I will say something really cool is that my husband and I are actually going to go swimming with the whale sharks next month, which you can do. It's his birthday present, and I'm super excited about this. Next slide, please.
Nice.
And then this is just the end. Thank you all for listening and hearing a little bit about my unique journey.
Oh, Dr. Roque, that was unbelievable. Here, let's come back to you. I'll stop sharing my screen for everyone. There we go. Wow. Honestly, of all the people we've had on, that is one of the most incredible journeys I think we've ever featured on the broadcast. I also love that it's your husband's birthday present, but I'm going with him. Yes, yeah. I'm not sure I like more of that or the first effort of the snowman as a Canadian. It was beautiful, very nice. Let's dive in with questions. I know we've got a bunch of classes joining us on YouTube, so welcome into all you folks. If you are on YouTube, please share in the chat. Mr. Shattuck's class in Chalk River, I'll come to you guys first. If you've got a query to kick us off. What a fantastic presentation. Mr. Shattuck, hi guys.
Hey, 2 questions. What's the difference between a nurse and when you were in school there? Was it like for the first couple of years, did you have to learn the language?
Yeah. Very good question. So the difference, I think the first question was, what's the difference between a nurse and a doctor? So there's, I think that can be answered in different ways. I work very closely with some excellent nurses in my clinic currently, who I think are the backbone of everything that I do as a physician. They're the ones that are first interacting with the patients. And the difference is really in terms of how long you are in school and what you focus on. Nurses do a lot of the bedside care. They're the ones that are doing blood pressure. They're the ones that are giving meds. And the doctors a lot of times are doing a lot of the ordering of tests and kind of figuring out the nitty gritty of what's going on with the patient. So we're all part of the healthcare team, and it's just we all have different roles in the healthcare team. And then the first couple of years of when I was in the United States, I did have to learn the language. I had to learn English. And that was really, really hard. I remember really being frustrated in the beginning when I didn't understand what the teachers were saying. I loved math because math is universal, right? We don't have to know a particular language to understand math. So I loved going to my math classes during that time. And I still love math, but at that point it was because I could understand it. I knew exactly what was going on. And I would say it took me about a couple years to really master the language. And then after that, my love of school just continued.
You accept? Is there anything you don't excel at? This is like a question for me, not our kids. Like, is there anything you try and you just absolutely suck, or are you amazing at everything?
I wouldn't say I'm amazing at everything. I think my husband and my sister, who I'm very close with, would say otherwise. I'm not very good at directions. I get lost like in my backyard. My husband will tell you.
Miss Dykstra's class are water rockers and Guelph, so they want to know back to this raft story, because this is quite the incredible beginning to the tale. So are all 30 people in the same raft, and how many days were you on it before you were discovered?
Great question. So and I will give the caveat that I was really young, so I know a lot of the information through my parents. Everybody was in the same raft / boat. This was a makeshift thing that my dad had built with some other people in our town. So we were all together there, and we were at sea for several days before we were picked up by what is the American Coast Guard. We were picked up right before we were going to Florida. We had arrived in Florida. And the couple of days we were at sea are a little bit scattered in my brain because we did stop at an island along the way, just a small island off the Cuban coast, essentially to hide from the Cuban police, which were kind of circulating. And if we had been discovered during that time, we would actually have been sent back to Cuba. My parents would have likely gone to jail at that point. So we were hiding out, waiting for them to go so that we could continue on in our journey.
Wow. The story, the plot thickens, and at least this is well. Speaking of bad directions, so contrary to that, you have been all over the place. You've done research all over the world. You've been all over the states and working where you live, where you travel. I guess your origin of your story is, of course, going from one country to another. But why is that experience so meaningful? Why do you seek out these opportunities where you get to go to different places? The Amazon you talked about, like, what's been the impact?
That's such a good question, Jesse. I will just say, in coming to Atlanta, this was, I think my mom had done the math. This was, I think, my 16th move since I left to go to college. So I have been all over the place, and I think what I would encourage the young folks that are listening, that opportunities come your way. It may not necessarily be what you envision that the next opportunity would be, but I would say keep an open mind, because there are things that come your way that will lead to the most incredible adventures. And for me, that was Peter. It started in Peter's lab and doing all these incredible things I got to do. But I would say that going outside your comfort zone is so important, particularly when you're young, because that will help give you these experiences, which will be really formative in your life going forth. So I've approached my life just like that. And I still do, even as a practicing physician. If someone comes and talks to me about certain opportunities, I try to keep an open mind in those situations. It may not be what I envision that the next thing will be, but it may just be a cool thing to do.
I love that you mentioned sort of that it can be scary to people, and it really is. Doing that the first time you do some big adventure or move somewhere or go on even a trip or approach something in a new way, change what your path is. It's very scary. The more you keep doing that, you sort of build up the, I guess, fortitude to keep doing it more and realizing that it does become an adventure and it's a nice opportunity. So I'm really, really glad you highlighted it that way. Fantastic. Another question from YouTube, and then we'll head back to Mr. Shattuck's live. Okay, I know this is tough as a person who's going to the aquarium, going diving soon, marine biologist at heart. What is your favorite ocean creature? No pressure.
That's really hard. I'm gonna have to say the whale shark. I'll be honest. The whale sharks at the aquarium are some of the coolest things I've ever seen. I have a year-long membership, which means I can go for free at any time. And I would literally just sit in front of the whale shark tank and just sit there for hours if I could.
They have, if I'm not mistaken, we've never done a program with the Georgia Aquarium. We need to, but it's such an amazing place. They have manta rays in that tank too, right?
They have these gigantic manta rays.
Oh, like the two icons of the ocean, giant amazing creatures. Very, very cool. All right, Mr. Shattuck's class, come on back in and take us away. Hey, guys.
What was your favorite fish when you were stuck at sea for a few days?
Yeah. Were you looking off the side of the boat or what?
I wasn't necessarily looking off the side of the boat, but I remember sort of vaguely when we were in this island that I was telling you about, where we were waiting for the Cuban police to kind of scatter and go away, that we would essentially play in the water, in the sand, and it seemed a little bit like a vacation. And so I do remember all these little fishies around at the time. But I would say probably starfish. They're really prevalent off the Cuban coast, and they're really prevalent in beaches in Cuba. And it just was a reminder and made it seem a little bit less scary as a child of everything that was going on that I didn't quite understand.
Absolutely. Another ocean question for you. See, you started with ocean and you set yourself up for this because this is what happens. Ms. Lewis's class, what was your favorite part of being on Alvin? Which, I mean, for those, I want to stress for our students, like, we've had a bunch of people that have been in Alvin before on this broadcast, but like in the history of man, maybe a few thousand tops people have been in a submersible down to the bottom of the ocean. Like, it's a really, really rare thing to have happen. So I'm curious about this question too. What's the best thing?
And I actually I recently texted Peter, who's a friend, and Peter Gerges, and I asked him, I was Do you think I'm the only infectious disease doctor to ever go down on the Alvin? I remember my favorite part is as you go down, and remember it takes a while to go down because it's such a long distance. You start to lose sunlight, and you start to see the bioluminescence after you lose sunlight, and it's pitch black, but you get these like splashes of light once you're deep enough, and it's these bioluminescent organisms and that are just going by the little porthole on the Alvin. And I remember looking out at this and just thinking, this is such an incredible experience, and I'll never forget that.
Absolutely. You're one of the only people ever to mention bioluminescent creatures, and I'm so glad. There's such an unbelievable thing for people who get to go into the ocean in any fashion, especially the deep sea. Very, very cool. On the HIV note, you talked about getting into infectious diseases as the pandemic hits, and I mean, I know we talked about that in a brief way. How is it now when you go? Is it like is your ward, or I guess is your hospital still separated COVID patients from un-COVID? Do you deal with COVID patients on a regular basis, or is HIV your main focus? So that's what they've, I guess, slotted you into. How does it work?
So currently, I would say that things are in a pretty good spot here in Atlanta. And what I mean is that the number of COVID positive patients in our hospital, and just to give everybody kind of an idea, my hospital holds about 450 beds, so we can hold about 450 patients. At the height of the pandemic and of my time here, there were close to 200 of those beds that were taken up by COVID positive patients. That has gone down quite a bit. I don't know the numbers exactly what it is right now. My time is split in two ways. On a daily basis, what I do for the most part is that I have a clinic where I see patients that come to see me with all sorts of infectious disease issues. It doesn't necessarily have to be that they're living with HIV. Can be other things like tuberculosis, can be that they've gotten fungal infections, can be that their primary care doctor has a particular question. That's the majority of my time. But for 10 weeks a year, I am what's called inpatient, which means that I am doing rounds in the hospital and answering questions from other doctors in the hospital related to infectious disease issues. During that time is when primarily we interact with patients that are COVID positive. And now infectious disease is primarily called with really complicated questions. So it tends to be COVID patients that are quite sick because the majority of the care is being done by the internal medicine doctors. So definitely still involved. My division is still involved in therapeutics and figuring out when isolation can come off, mask policies. So we're kind of gearing all of this still and driving all of this.
Yeah. I mean, you have such different days, which I find so fascinating. I always like to harp on this to people that are curious about science as a career, is that most of the scientists, doctors, people who, I mean, no one's quite had your story by any means, but like the idea that you get to work with so many different people in such a positive way, collaborate with people both locally and around the globe, and connect in such a meaningful way is such a special part about ending up in a career path like yours. And again, sort of a testament to the I Was a Kid series of just amazing people. So again, thank you to Karen for pulling that together, and we'll pass along that link in a minute. Dr. Roque, like time flies and you're having fun, so we could talk all day about this stuff, but we are going to wrap with one question, I suppose, and that is, you've hopped along, you've moved 16 times, you've done all these amazing things, you're really fulfilled in your work. Is there like a next thing? Is there something now that's just maybe the budding of it that you're thinking, oh, maybe in 5 years or so, or maybe, a week next Tuesday, you might want to focus on in a bigger way, or are you really happy exactly where you are? What's next for you?
That's a really good question, Jesse. I always think that you always have to keep striving, and you have to keep reaching for the next goal and for the next opportunity. It doesn't mean that I'm not currently fulfilled in what I'm doing, but I do encourage kids and even adults to continue to dream big about what comes next. For me, I'm currently focused on projects on how to help people here in Atlanta that are living with HIV, and how to help improve their lives, and particularly how to help improve access of information to young people to prevent HIV infection. And I will say I'm thinking maybe a little bit about political office in the future and how to bridge the two worlds of medicine and policy to continue to make change and to help continue to help improve people's lives.
You're literally like the American dream story, or Canadian dream, or all the good dreams. We look forward to having you on as both astronaut and president in the future for another broadcast. We'll check back in with you in a few years and see when you've made it. Dr. Roque, what a special program. Thank you so much for joining us today. I do want to stress for our kids, if you guys are keen, iwasaKid.com has both Dr. Roque's bio, a little bit more about her amazing work. You can check out this video forever, share it with your friends and family, and I hope you get that chance. And with that, I know it's your first time joining us, so how we wrap, I'm going to bring in our live class and YouTube classes. You can chime in as well. A big thank you and farewell. So Mr. Shaddix Group, come on in. Thank you guys so much for joining. Dr. Roque, what a pleasure.